were again trying to, I think, engage the community to say, well, can we have some, can we come up with some guidelines and so forth. I don't remember if you were at that meeting.
I wasn't, but I remember that there was a forum organized.
Yeah.
So, were you directly involved in deciding to pass the moratorium?
It was really the president's decision.
Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, he talked to us about kind of the pros and cons, how he was viewing things. I was not on cabinet at that point, but being one of kind of the out queer administrators, he would often just talk with me, or call me to the table when they were trying to figure out what to do. What to do about
And
it.
he valued your input as a queer person, is okay.
As well as an administrator, yeah.
And what was your advice?
I could not. I think the community could not figure out a way to resolve the potential for the hostile work environment, given where we were at that point, and I think that we had to, but all of our kind of discussions leading up to that point had been, some folks in the community saying, all right, here are some aspects of chalking that are problematic. Could we agree, you the chalkers and the rest of the community, could we agree that we won't do that anymore? And the response was, typically very radical, saying, no, we're going to chalk whatever we want, wherever we want it. And, that's too bad. So I think that we had this, these two things that were competing and that I think were not able to be resolved, in a win-win kind of situation.
Did you anticipate the sort of student reaction to the moratorium?
Yeah, I think everybody did.
To the extent that it, I mean, did you anticipate this being such a long-term conflict and major media sources getting involved? And
I anticipated that it would be long-term, I think, because of the fact that our population turns over. So, so right after the moratorium was declared and then the ban was declared, there were some students who continued to chalk because they weren't happy with that decision. But then those students graduate and leave the community, and new students come in who don't know what all the issues were, don't know. I mean, what I'm sharing with you is just my narrative. Certainly there are others that, I think that mine's informed and fair, because, I loved the chalking when I first came to Wesleyan. I thought that it was cool that the space was queered, a couple times a year, but certain aspects of it became problematic. So anyways, but students graduate, they don't know kind of why we have this ban. To many it feels silly. I think to queer students it felt like a specific expression that they had embraced was silenced. And so, those things don't just evaporate just because people graduate. I mean, some of those things persist through time.
Can you describe some of the protests on campus that you recall, or specific instances?
Mostly it was the continuation of chalking. I mean, there were certain times where students would. I call it perhaps unfairly like kitchen sink protests, where you grab like a whole bunch of things that students aren't happy about and you present them all at once. And so it surfaced in a couple of those, in the years after the ban was put into place. And I don't mean to detract the seriousness of all those, things. It's just like, it's not like need blind. I mean, it's like, like this assortment of, they don't have the sandwiches we like at Pie Cafe anymore, to like really serious, well, for some people I'm sure that was serious, but to really serious things like, chalking and, student voice and institutional decision making and stuff like that. So.
And are you referencing the big occupation of Doug Bennett's office hours.
That was one of the things.
That's
right.
one that I've heard referenced a lot.
And the catalyst for that one was really changes that WESU was making in terms of affiliating with NPR. I mean, that was the big, catalyst for that conglomeration of issues coming forward, but chalking was in there as well. Which
seems strange to inspire that sort of, unified student action.
Yeah. Well, at the time, I think that the general student population didn't realize that the student leadership of WESU thought that it was a good thing to do. So many students felt like it was a power grab, or a mainstreaming of, the kind of station, if you will. So.
And so what about all the faculty outspokenness about chalking? Did that bother the administration or Doug Bennett? Was that anticipated?
Well, I think that there were faculty who certainly were resistant to. They thought that that a ban was not a solution. They didn't really. I don't remember. Now, I wasn't privy to every conversation that Doug Bennett had with other people about chalking, but my understanding is that nobody really presented, none of the faculty really presented a solution to the hostile workplace kind of issue, which is really
But they did vote overwhelmingly against the ban.
I think that that's the case, yeah.
According to the records that I've seen.
Yeah, I think that that's the case. And again, the problem was, well, okay, you don't like the ban, we get that, but how do we resolve this, hostile work environment thing?
So do you think that Doug Bennett was at all taken aback or bothered by the fact that faculty, many faculty came out in support of the students on this decision? And was that something that caused any distress for the administration?
I think that he was disappointed that faculty were supporting chalking without offering suggestions for the problem with which he was contending, which is, you have this kind of free speech-ish issue, versus this, law, really, saying that if you as an employer have reports of a sexual or of a hostile work environment for your employees, you need to, under sexual harassment law, you need to take steps to resolve that. So I think that he was, I remember him saying, well, their faculty supporting or against the ban, supporting students, but the problem is that we're trying to resolve here is this hostile work environment problem, and nobody's coming up with suggestions for how to do that. And so I think that he said, well, I need to resolve this, so this is the direction that I'm moving in.
I've also spoken to a student or an alum who managed to hack into Doug Bennett's email address and send out an all-campus email purportedly from Doug Bennett saying that the chalking moratorium was over.
Oh,
do you recall
I remember that happening? Yep. Yeah. Well, I didn't know exactly how it happened. If he had hacked into his email or he had simply made it appear.
I think it was the latter. I don't quite know how.
I think it was the latter as well.
Right.
But I do remember that happening. Yeah.
And what was the reaction to that?
I don't think there was one really. I mean, there was a correction that was, or a clarification I think that was sent out that followed that. But
were there any instances of really extreme student activism that surprised you, or?
Not really.
Okay.
Not really.
So, how did the situation ever resolve itself? I mean, I know that if it was followed by a permanent ban.
Right.
Or what about all the media coverage, actually? What about the New York Times article, the NPR article?
I don't know. I don't know how effectively it was communicated to the media, kind of what the core issue was, or at least the core issue was, that I've explained to you, kind of what pushed us to this point. I don't know that I don't know that that issue was effectively communicated as part of the as part of the issue, and I think that it may have been represented in certain respects as the administration just doesn't like the content of this stuff, which I think was the case for some in the administration, but the real issue that got us to where we are today is this hostile work environment thing.
And definitely I've talked to, well, only a few students who were on campus at the time.
Yeah.
But a lot of them have a very different perception of what inspired the moratorium, which is that Doug Bennett was essentially trying to make the university more presentable to parents and to pre-frosh, and a little bit less confrontational in its radical politics, and a little bit more I don't know if mainstream is the right word, but definitely a little bit more palatable to a different kind of student and less frightening. Do you think that that was a part of it, or do you think that that's totally false?
No, I think that some of that was operating in his in the calculus of his decision making, Zach. He would very often get emails from visitors, from the parents who were bringing their kids and sometimes younger siblings for tours, while the chalking was on the sidewalks, and I think that he felt like he himself was embarrassed by it, kind of as the leader of the institution, and he certainly didn't like getting the complaints and having to respond to those complaints. I think the other thing that he often said is that he had a concern because it was free speech, but it was not able to be attributed to anyone. And he felt that the somewhat anonymous nature of it gave people license to be cruel, I guess, to be over the edge and or cruel, and create arguably a hostile environment for some others on the campus. So he was a big proponent of let's get to a point where everybody has to sign their chalking. But of course there is no way to do that unless the community agrees to do that. There's no way to do that. And so those things, I think the things that you mentioned were definitely at play in his calculus, but and points that he raised